The House Intelligence Committee has concluded its scheduled public hearings in the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Some of the testimony dovetailed into the fifth Democratic debate and was the focus of the first question. Here's Senator Bernie Sanders making the point that while he believes the president is corrupt, focusing too much on him could work against Democrats.
Well, Rachel, sadly, we have a president who is not only a pathological liar, he is likely the most corrupt president in the modern history of America. But we cannot simply be consumed by Donald Trump, because if we are, you know what? We're going to lose the election.
Joining me now to discuss impeachment, the debate, and so much more is host of the Kyle Kulinski Show, Kyle Kulinski himself. He joins me via Skype. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you too, Crystal. Thanks for having me.
What did you think of Bernie's response there? And what do you think overall about how these impeachment hearings went for Democrats this week?
I mean, listen, I can't really answer how they went for Democrats because I'm just tired. I follow this stuff for a living, and I can't bring myself to pay attention every single day to the impeachment hearings. I know that, like, political junkies in Washington, D.C. Love this like they're watching some sort of soap opera or something. But to me, they're incredibly tedious. They're overly complex. They're boring. I mean, yes, I get it. Donald Trump tried to get dirt on Joe Biden and on Hunter Biden. I understand that. I know that they want me to be incredibly outraged about that, but I'm just not, especially because there's about 37 other things that Trump does on a daily basis that are more outrageous. So in terms of Bernie's answer there, though, what he said is great. What he said is going to land with the American people. But what he said is something you're not even allowed to say in Washington, D.C., because, any deviation from complete agreement with the line on impeachment is viewed as heresy. So, I mean, how are they going? They're really stale, in my opinion. And we just had a couple rounds of polls that came out this week, which showed that Trump is going in the opposite direction in the polls. He's going in the direction that the Democrats don't want him to go. There was one poll of, I believe, independents, and he swung 6 points in his favor. So it's not the right strategy. You can make an argument from a principled perspective of we have to hold this guy accountable because we can't let him get away with all the things he's done. I understand that, and I sympathize with that. But from a strategic perspective, leave it to the Democrats to go into a battle that they know they're going to lose, because even if it gets through the House, which is definitely a possibility that he gets impeached in the House, it 100% dies in the Senate. It's not even a question. This guy has an 89% approval rating with the Republican Party. You think you're even going to chip away 5 Republican senators? Oh, please.
Look, I mean, Will Hurd, who is as moderate as they come of a Republican and who is retiring, so he doesn't have to fear the wrath of the Trump voter or whatever, is now out saying, look, it was not good. It was a bad thing to do, but it's not impeachable. And I think that's ultimately where the Republicans land. Frankly, I think it's where the American public is moving to. It's what you see in these polls that people say, okay, yeah, we don't like what Donald Trump did here, but we also don't want you all to be wrapped up in months and months of this sort of drama at the expense of focusing on things we actually care about: healthcare, wages, labor rights, climate change, etc.
Democrats love to craft their arguments in a vacuum as if it's impossible for Republicans to respond. So when they go out there and they talk about, Joe Biden, when they try to protect Joe Biden when his response is, this is corruption. So his argument is very simple. This is corruption. Their argument is, oh my God, you did a no-no phone call where you're trying to dig up dirt on your political opponent. I'm just not that outraged by trying to dig up dirt on your political opponent. I'm just not. I understand that the way he did it is not acceptable and shouldn't be done by any president, and it violates norms. Trump is a norm violator. Like, I got that on day one. I understood that on day one. So in many ways, his counter argument, I think, is just much more powerful. It's much more potent than their argument of, oh my God, you made a no-no phone call. So if they wanted to go all in on impeachment, I mean, the strategy should be obvious. I've said this a million times before, but you have a guy who's taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Saudi government through his DC hotel, and then he's giving Saudi Arabia a multi-billion-dollar weapons deal as they committed genocide in Yemen. I'm much more outraged by a president helping to facilitate a genocide than I am by him making a phone call trying to dig up dirt on somebody who is indeed dirty.
The fact that we are in any way involved in the worst atrocity unfolding in the globe right now in Yemen is something that people should be genuinely outraged about, and I couldn't agree with you more on that. Let's talk a little bit about the debate. I'm sure you, like I, loved the fact that the MSNBC moderators decided to ask Bernie a question about a rally chant, but Pete Buttigieg, who literally faked black endorsements and said that these endorsers were black when half of them were actually white, and used a stock photo from Kenya, doesn't get any questions about that. Yeah,
Mayor Pete got no question about that giant scandal. You had Elizabeth Warren, who got no question about a clear backtrack from Medicare for All. It was an embarrassing night. I mean, Bolivia. You'd think they'd ask a question about Bolivia when you have Pompeo and a bunch of neocons in the government basically siding with a right-wing coup. You would think they would have time for at least one question when a duly elected government in a South American country has been exiled, and you have the self-appointed president declaring that she's going to go after protesters and the police have immunity so they could do whatever they want to do. Like, you would think that these things would come up. Not only did they not come up, every question was framed in like a weird gotcha right-wing way. They asked Elizabeth Warren at one point, would you use U.S. taxpayer money to take down the parts of the border wall that are already up? What is this? I mean, it's like everything is a gotcha right-wing framing. It's conceding the ground to Fox News. And what's interesting is, you've actually seen in a lot of these debates that Fox News, since they are the Republican propaganda network, they actually get more leeway to ask some decent questions. Whereas when it's MSNBC or when it's CNN, it's so overwhelming that they get accused of having a liberal bias, that they go, okay, we're not going to do that. And then they run in the other direction and they ask insane questions from a right-wing perspective. I mean, asking Elizabeth Warren, hey, only 1% of Americans are in the military. Should that number go up?
Right. To which she said yes, which is like, really? And that was in lieu of asking her. That was in the foreign policy section. Look, we know very little about Elizabeth Warren's foreign policy. What I've seen, frankly, has been troubling. I mean, she's put out this very mealy-mouthed statement on Bolivia as one example. And so they finally come to her for a foreign policy question. I thought, okay, great, here we go. And then you ask her that weird question. It's like, what are we doing here? I mean, I also loved the one to Andrew Yang about what would you say on a phone call with Putin? What?
By the way, Andrew Yang didn't get a question for over 30 minutes. And
right.
And what the first question, I believe, they asked him about, what makes you prepared to respond to a terror attack?
Right.
He's about equally prepared as the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and somehow that guy doesn't get that question because he's one of the media darlings.
Right.
So you see the bias. The bias is overwhelming against every single anti-establishment candidate. Andrew Yang got treated terribly, and he didn't get a lot of time to speak, but he did really well with the time that he got. And then, of course, Tulsi, I mean, forget it. She destroyed Mayor Pete, and then afterwards the spin machine went into full effect, and they tried to act like that didn't happen. And yeah, it's really sad because I know and you know that quite literally anybody in the YouTube political commentary space could have hosted a better debate.
So true. So true. And meanwhile, the DNC wants to complain about Tim Alberta because he worked at National Review, potentially hosting a debate. I mean, you couldn't do worse than these moderators did. So I'm all for Tim Alberta, guys. It wouldn't be bad for these candidates to have to face some tough questions, especially the media darlings like Buttigieg and Warren. I wanted to ask you, though, your thoughts a little bit. I'm sure you saw this new Emerson poll that has Bernie tied with Biden for first. Look, it's a little bit of an outlier, but also today, for the first time, Bernie has now retaken second place. He surpassed Elizabeth Warren in the RCP average, which seems to me to be significant. What do you think he needs to do? What do you see as his path to actually winning this thing?
I mean, the thing with Bernie is it's all the fundamentals. It's all keep it simple, because the reason why he's as popular as he is because he's relentless in talking about the policies, talking about how he wants to fix this country, talking about how the system is just massively corrupt and we need real political revolution. Just doing reform is not enough. We're beyond that point. And he's really bold. He's willing to stake out important positions, and he's the moral compass of everybody. So I think that if he sticks to that, he can win. I mean, he absolutely can win. And, I think that, I know this is, just a recent thing here, but the cream always rises to the top, man. And it actually reminds me of, pick a sport and pick the best player in that sport. Sure, they might not have a good game, maybe one game, or they might, for a couple weeks, they might be off their game. But the cream always rises to the top. And over the course of a season, that player is going to beat everybody else. And somebody like Bernie, who's, not only a great politician, he's also a chief organizer. He would be the organizer in chief. I mean, what are you going to do? You going to beat that guy's ground game? Oh, please. This is a guy who's been marching with unions for decades. This is a guy who everybody knows he's on their side. He's going to fight for you. He has his set of policy goals, and he's going to be relentless in trying to fix the system for the American people. So, yeah, okay, in the short run, sure, Mayor Pete might get a bump, and he might do okay in some polls with 13% of the people polled under the age of 35. Like, I get it. But in the long run, it's tough to beat somebody like Bernie, particularly because his ground game is so strong. He has a record number of individual donors, over 4 million individual donors. We just heard the other night that he broke his record for new donors during the debate. I think there were like 50,000 or something ridiculous like that. So, yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to stop that guy? The only thing I would say to him to tweak his campaign message is you don't have to hesitate to be a little more direct in your call outs. And also, I would say to, like Tulsi, for example, and Yang, they're barely hanging on in terms of polling now. So, like instead of your closing statement like Tulsi did the other night, and she had a good debate, but her closing statement, she brought up Martin Luther King Jr. and unity and all this stuff. I would tell her, listen, that's a closing statement for somebody who's in the lead. You're not in the lead. You're low in the polls right now. So you got to throw a Hail Mary pass. So what I would do if I was them is directly call out on stage, Joe Biden took X amount of money from this corporation or this billionaire, and he did this in return. Amy Klobuchar took X amount of money from this corporation or this billionaire and did that in return. And go scorched earth, man. Go in. So that's what I would do if I was the lower polling candidates. But you didn't ask me that question, and I'm just babbling now.
No, I think it's a good strategy for them. I think it's a good strategy for Bernie, too. Look, Elizabeth Warren took a lot of money from medical device manufacturers and then got their tax goodies for them. So it applies across the board. Kyle, thank you so much. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Crystal. I appreciate it.
We'll have more Rising after this.